So I'm Emma Pringle. I'm with Bob Ozee. It is May 3rd. It's 1 o'clock, right?
It is.
All right.
Almost.
Good enough.
I'm early. I'm always early.
Well, I appreciate it. Where would you like to begin?
It's your show.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up?
I grew up in Shawneetown, Illinois.
What brought you here?
I enlisted in the Navy 6 months prior to my graduation from high school on a 180-day delay program, and I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia on an ammunition ship, and we used to come into Elkins, West Virginia on weekend getaways, and I married the sister of a shipmate and stayed here.
Okay. When was that?
It was 1976.
And that's when you got out of the Navy?
No, I got out of the Navy in 77.
Okay. When did you start working for the railroad?
March of 78.
How did it come about? Did somebody introduce you?
Her dad worked on the railroad for 22 years in Huntington. Her granddad retired from C&O Railroad in Huntington. And I hadn't been out of the Navy but just a few months, and they said, you need to go in and put an application in at the railroad. So at that time, you put it in at the unemployment office, and then that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. What was your first job?
Out of the Navy?
Oh, out in the railroad.
Oh, I hired out as a carman temp, or temporary carman.
Okay. What was working that job like? What were your duties?
Burning and welding. It was the same thing day in and day out. They brought in a certain class of freight hoppers or whatever they were working, boxcars, and you would just rebuild those cars from top to bottom, whatever they needed. Mm-hmm. A lot of burning and welding.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like hard work.
It's hot.
I believe you.
Torch. You ever burn with a cutting torch all day long?
No.
Or stand behind a welder all day long? It's tough.
No. How long were you temp carman?
I worked that job for about 2.5 years, and then we had a locomotive machinist retired, and a laborer that I worked with come out and said, hey, you ought to go put in for that machinist job. He said, you were a machinist in the Navy, weren't you? I said, yeah, I was a machinist mate, which has nothing to do with locomotive maintenance or anything like that. But he went and talked to the general foreman, and they called me out to the office, and he told me to go put in an application, so I had to go back over to the unemployment office and reapply. And that was the end of my carman career, and I went to locomotive lead machinist eventually. And when they shut this place down, I went to Grafton. That was a B&O shop. This was a Western Maryland shop. So I went over to that B&O shop. They had vacancies. I filled vacancies over there for several years before I eventually got into a permanent position, and then they started reduction again and got cut off there. When I got back, it was at Willard, Ohio, and that was a B&O shop. I went out there for a ready track foreman's job, worked that until they abolished the ready track foreman's job, and then I went back down to lead machinist again. And that's what I finished up as with 38.5 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you did a lot of traveling when you did this job?
At my retirement party, which will be six years on June the 1st, I retired on my birthday at 60 years old. They had figured I drove just over 1 million miles back and forth to work.
Wow.
Because my last probably 30 years, just over 30 years, was at Grafton, which was right at 100 miles a day, round trip from home to work and back.
Wow.
Plus I worked in Willard, Ohio for 1.5 years. Didn't get to come home much there.
Mm-hmm.
So just stayed there.
Mm-hmm. You just stayed there? You had like an apartment or
I
something
rented an
like that?
apartment,
Was it?
240 drive. I mean, between shifts.
Was it hard to be away?
Oh, yeah.
Did you have a family at that point?
Right, yeah. My wife was in college, and my daughter was in college. They both went to D&E.
Wow.
Oh no, my daughter was a senior in high school, but by the time I got out of Willard and back to Grafton, which was the closest I could get back to home, my daughter was in college too. So it just easier, made more sense for me to go and live out of a sack than it was for, to uproot and sell a house and everything like that. But by that time, I had so much time invested in the railroad, I wasn't going to give up on it unless it got too stupid. That was bad enough, though. I had to call. I was laid off and I ran out of my guarantee, so I called the Railroad Retirement Board in Huntington. That was back before computers were real popular, and I asked them if they had any machinist vacancies, and they gave me the number of the general foreman at Willard, Ohio. So I called him and he asked for my records, and I told him where they were at. I'd come to town to do something. When I got back, I had a message on the phone. So I called him back and he said, when can you be here? I said, when do you want me? He said, 7 o'clock in the morning. I said, I'll see you in the morning. And when I got off the phone, I asked my wife, I said, where in the hell is Willard, Ohio? Because she was born in Ohio. I thought she might know. But no, I found it.
Okay.
And it was a tough job there. I was halfway between Cumberland, Maryland and Chicago on main line B&O. Busy, real busy. They had like 2 sets of yard engines running in the eastbound yard, 2 sets of yard engines running in the westbound yard, just to keep up with switching the cars in Willard. And before I left there, they double tracked the main line.
Wow.
It was busy. I don't know what it is anymore. I've been gone 6 years.
You worked that about 6 years?
No, I've been retired for 6 years.
Oh, okay. Wow. So what was it like adjusting when you got to the machinist position? You said that you had a totally different set of experience. Was there like an adjustment period?
Oh, there was a learning curve. I mean, it was still, the only shifts they worked here was first shift, daylight, except for a couple that worked the repair track. So the time was about the same, but it was a totally different job. Instead of working on rebuilding freight cars, it was service, inspection, and repair of locomotives. So there was a lot to learn.
What was a typical day like?
They only worked one shift on the locomotive side. So you come out, you never knew whether you was going to have 5 locomotives to start on or 15 locomotives to start on. And you just worked until you got them done. Sanding, fueling, inspecting, repairing whatever you could. And come back tomorrow and do it again. But it was more interesting work than standing there with a torch and a welder all day. And you got like road trips, like they run out of here, they would go over to Laurel Bank. Have you heard of Laurel Bank? You used to have to go over there and work on something that was broke down. If it was something that they couldn't pull in, like a pinion or something slipped or broke or something and locked up a wheel, well then you got to go over and do something with that. You can't just drag a sliding wheel all the way from Laurel Bank to here. And if it was something that you could fix and they knew you could fix and get the locomotive back in service and save a train, you go over and work on stuff. And over to Baird, you know where Baird's at?
I don't know where it's at, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, they used to have a little shop over there years ago, but by the time I got on the railroad, that shop there were some track people worked out of there, but they still left locomotives and stuff set over there, so we'd have to go over there every now and then and work on stuff. You got to go get out of the shop and run around a little bit, get it more interesting. Sometimes you go to work on something and it's in like a machinist, an electrician, and you get on an engine and get it going, and then ride it for a few miles to see if it was working all right. So it was a lot more fun.
And did you like work with people, or was this something that they sent you out alone on?
Most of your road trips back then on Western Maryland was, it could be 50-50. A lot of mine were single, just me, depending on what they said the problem was, which they usually didn't know until you got there. They would send a laborer or an electrician with you.
So you mentioned that your wife's dad also worked on the railroad. Were there any other people in your life that worked on the railroad?
Not on my side of the family, no. Well, my daughter.
Your daughter?
When she got out she had a year to go in college, and I come home one night, I was working second shift, and she said, "Dad, I'm tired of going to school. I want to take some time off." I said, "You better get a job, kid." So I printed out we had computers in, so I got on the job site and printed out a job, and it was in Richmond, Virginia for trainmen. And her and her boyfriend and a girl that was the daughter of a guy that I worked with, he was an engineer, went over there, and my daughter got hired, so she worked on the railroad for a few years and then had to have hip surgery and didn't go any farther. But yeah, that's the three people that I'm actually related to that worked.
What did she do?
She hired out as a trainman, which they start you out as brakeman, and then you work up to conductor. And then by the time she hired out, they didn't hire out like brakeman or conductor or engineer. Years ago, that's what you hired out as. By the time she hired out, it was trainman, and you started as brakeman, and you took advancement to conductor, and you were required to take those advancements or they could dismiss you. But she went up to conductor and didn't go any farther than that.
She got up to conductor?
Yeah.
After she got her hip surgery, did she go back to school, or did she do something else?
She married another conductor and made 2 babies and
Raised them?
Oh, and her husband was a conductor on the railroad.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of connection there.
What were some really memorable events that happened to you when you were working on the railroad?
Oh, seen a lot of people get killed.
How?
I didn't see them get killed, but people that I knew, there was, I think, 2 guys got killed on the B&B.
What was the B&B?
Bridge and building. The cable snapped or something, and they were working on a bridge and it killed. I know it killed 1, and I'm thinking 2, but I mean, that was a long time ago. And then train wrecks.
So working on the railroad was like life-threatening, dangerous, huh?
When they would hire new, I was working over at Grafton, there was people in and out of there all the time from like Parkersburg and Cumberland, different locations. So, you had to watch yourself. People work around each other, they kind of expect and know what the other guy's going to do, but when you're working in a terminal where trains are coming in, you don't know what the other people are going to do. We had Q316 and Q317, one was eastbound, one was westbound. They meet. It runs from Cumberland, Maryland to Parkersburg. And they met one morning. It was real foggy. One of them was supposed to take a siding. There was a miscommunication or something. And they hit head on. One of them had 3 locomotives, and I think the other one had 2. And I think there was 4 people died in that wreck.
Wow. When was this?
Oh, hell, that was 20-some years ago. Don't even remember their names. I've seen all 4 of them the day before. I worked the ready track there, and they would come in and they'd drop their power off to us. They'd cut away from the yarder train, unless it was a through train, and bring the power to the shop and turn it over to me. Yeah. Pretty sad.
Yeah. Were you ever in a dangerous situation like that? Like, where you got in a train wreck?
No, I was never involved. I worked in the shop.
Okay.
service and supply the locomotives. I would dispatch them out to crews and stuff like that. They would come in and see me and get their power and leave. I mean, you had to watch what you was doing out there. Anything slip, trips, and falls was the most dangerous thing where we were at. Something fell on you, a good chance you wouldn't tell nobody about it because everything on that railroad was unforgiving, heavy, massive.
Did you have anything that happened to you that you were really proud of? Any achievements when you were on the railroad?
No, I just tried to do my job, and if a chance to move up a little bit here and there came along, if I wanted it, I would go for it. I went through management training after it was CSX. It was 13 weeks in Jacksonville. I mean, they flew me home every weekend, flew me back to Jacksonville. They would send you to different shops, like Corbin, Kentucky. That was a Q shop. Cumberland, Maryland, there was another Q shop. Training. And then at the end of that, well, actually before the end of that, they had a big problem with management in Corbin, Kentucky. And there were 6 of us out of the mechanical side training in Corbin, and they tried to get all 6 of us to take positions down there and drop out of the training. I didn't want to live in Corbin, Kentucky. The only reason I was doing that training, that was management type training. I was doing that for the future because there was a lot of change on this railroad. From the time I started, it was Western Maryland, then it went to Chessie System, then it went to CSX Transportation. And you didn't know where you was going to go or what you was going to do or if you was even going to have a job once they started this stuff, cutting off. They came in here when they made the Chessie System and had a big feed up at Texas or up at the steakhouse and told everybody, you don't have to worry about your job. This place is too far away from everything to ever shut it down. 2 weeks later, they furloughed everybody.
That's so tough.
But I mean, some of the management would come in and feed you a line like that, and knowing that, you think it was a secret to them? They knew. Why did they try to? And I can understand because a lot of times when they furlough people, they were supposed to give you a 5-day furlough notice according to your contract. They would give you what they call an emergency furlough notice and off the property now. That was a lot of times somebody would try to fake an accident or something. Well, I'm going to get furloughed. So, which was horseshit. Yeah. But people did it.
So you got trained for management, you went into management, and how
No, I never did take a job.
Oh, you never did take a job.
Not in management. I did ready track foreman, which is a contract supervisor.
Okay.
The training that I went to in Jacksonville was non-contract management positions.
Okay.
And I never took one of those. I had a couple opportunities, but like one of them was in Louisville, Kentucky, and Corbin, Kentucky. I think there was one in North Carolina somewhere, which I thought about. Weather-wise.
Was this one of the only big changes that you saw during your time at the railroad, or were there other changes that you saw?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of, everything went from like person-to-person type management to computer stuff, It went from being a railroader, your boss was a railroader, he hired out, he worked his way up through and became a boss, and he knew what he was talking about and what he was doing. And then it went to, they would hire people. At one time they were hiring military people. They were actually recruiting lower level military officers to be railroad officers, managers and stuff, which is all fine and well. I mean, it's a good class of people, but they don't know shit about a railroad.
Why were they purposely hiring military officers?
I don't know whose idea that was. That came out of Jacksonville. But now that was when I was working over at Grafton. Had two different train masters that came in there that were military officers. I don't even remember what branch they were, but I had a round with one of them. They come down to the service center. See, I was on the ready track, which is mechanical. The other end is transportation, and that's what the train master was over. The engineers, conductors, and stuff like that, running trains. So our manager, we didn't have any management for the last 20 years that I worked over there. No local company managers. And the last 20 years that I was over there, we didn't even have any contract supervisors. They did away with all that. They went to lead machinist jobs, and that's what I had. But you're a lead man, and then you got a company manager being a train master down here at the other end, and he knows he's a company supervisor, and you're not even a supervisor, you're just a lead man. So they try to run roughshod over you to get what they want. So you have to stand up for yourself. We eventually did get a general foreman out of Philadelphia, but he was stationed in Philadelphia. That's a pretty good ways from Grafton, West Virginia. I mean, they would help you out, but I didn't mind butting heads with those guys. They'd come down there and barking out orders, this, that, and what they wanted. They didn't know what we were doing anyway. Just tell them, take a number, get in line. But the railroad changed a lot. I mean, it went from being a railroad to being a more of a business-run, money-making deal instead of actual working people. Big difference. Instead of working with people that worked their way up and knew what they were doing and talking about, you were working with people that never set foot on a railroad. And they were trying to tell you how to do your job. They can tell you a lot of things that, you know, safety-wise and stuff like that, but sometimes that safety stuff they're preaching don't really work on your job.
How so?
They don't know what you got to do that job. It's like they started out with this fall protection stuff. You had to put a harness on, and it had to be tethered off up above wherever you was going, all this. Well, how are you going to do that? And I think it was like 6 feet. If you're 6 feet off the ground, you know how high a walkway on a locomotive is? Just over my head, right at 6 foot. You got to put that harness and all that stuff on just to walk on the walkway. That didn't apply to transportation, but it applied to us because we were mechanical working on them. I said, that's not going to work.
Were there any other big changes in the railroad that you noticed that directly affected your career?
Not really. The mergers affected everybody's career. When they would merge, they would just, it was like people would come in from all directions looking for things, jobs to cut out. Oh, we can do this job from over here and whatever, you know. A lot of people lost out big time. It's like here when the fire burnt down the roundhouse. I was working here. I was a machinist here at that time. And it was in the wintertime. It was cold. It was freezing at nights. We had 2 air compressors in there. And they were water-cooled air compressors. The general foreman sent me in there to shut the water off and knock the inspection plates off so the water would drain out so it wouldn't freeze up and crack the blocks on those air compressors. Those air compressors wouldn't fit in this room. They were huge. You don't tell them what they were worth. If they'd froze and busted, it cost a lot of money, you know. Not that it made any difference because they never started them back up again anyway, but the place was still on fire. The fire department was still there squirting water. I'm in here loosening bolts on an air compressor.
Oh man. So were you there? You were there for the fire. What was that like?
It was big. It was hot. I mean, I had a locomotive to do a 45-day inspection on that evening. They said, you can work over and get that done, or you can just leave it and do it tomorrow. I said, I'm about done, I'll just go ahead and do it. So I worked an hour overtime, finished that up, pulled it out of the roundhouse. The roundhouse burnt down that night. So it was a GP40. If I hadn't worked over and did that, that locomotive would have burned up in the fire. They'd probably made money on it with insurance, but anyhow, I don't know what started. There's 1,000 different rumors about it. But yeah, somebody called me. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning. Said the roundhouse is on fire. Better get in here. I don't remember who it was. Yeah, it was on fire, all right. It's damn near out by the time I got here. I mean, it's still smoldering. It was still shooting water, but I don't know what time it started.
Wow.
It was a mess.
Yeah. Well, what happened after the roundhouse burnt down?
There was approximately 100 carmen working here at that time. I had switched over from carmen to machinist a couple years before that, and they laid off like 80 carmen within the next couple weeks. Went down to about 20 carmen and never did recover after that. They used to do a lot of work here. I don't know whether that fire, a lot of people said, well, they set that fire, somebody set that fire, they hired them so they could, collect insurance and shut this place down. Because it had changed over. It was no longer Western Maryland, it was Chessie system. But you know how rumors are. I was the first carman hired here in 78. It had been 13 years since they had hired a carman here.
Wow. Why was that?
Down, business down. I don't know exactly why. There was people that had been laid off. You had to serve 1,040 days as a carman to become a bona fide carman, according to the union agreement. And when I hired out, I went behind guys, 3 or 4 guys that were the last hired, and they didn't even have their carman time worked out. I went right on the roster right behind them. And I never worked my carman time out either because I transferred over to machinist, and they accepted my 4 years in the Navy as a machinist mate for my qualification as a locomotive machinist, which was ridiculous. Whoever accepted that didn't know what the hell they was doing because I'd never seen a locomotive before. Well, I'd seen them, but never fooled with them. But it turned out that on board ship we had these what they called SSTGs, ship's service turbo generators. They were emergency generators. It was the same diesel engine powering those ship service turbo generators that powered a GP9 locomotive.
Wow.
EMD 2-cycle diesel locomotive, 16 cylinder, same exact engine. So I had a little bit of, I knew what it looked like.
What happened when you stopped working for the railroad?
I didn't have time to do anything else. You know, everybody talks about, well, when I retire, I'll do this, I'll do that. You don't have time to do anything. You always got something to do, or I do anyway.
What do you do?
Well, we like to travel. I spent 4 years at sea in the Navy, and my wife likes to go to the beach. Imagine that. So, yeah, we like to do our vacations. Our daughter and grandkids live in Georgia, so we try to run down there a couple times. And we got a camper. Last year we put 8 weeks in the camper, different places. And, crafting, we do a lot of crafting. She's pretty crafty. So I've got all kinds of, I can't get a vehicle in my garage without moving stuff around because of all the equipment, woodworking equipment. I got saws and lathes and more saws and planers, just busy.
Yeah. Do you have anything written down on the list of questions that we haven't talked about yet? I know you've made notes to prepare.
I don't know. You're going right down the list, aren't you?
That's what I've been trying to do.
Then you got to the end of it.
Yeah, I wrote it down. I'm gonna use it.
You said any regrets
Any regrets? Did you have regrets
about
about the railroad?
working for the railroad?
Yeah, like anything
No.
that happened that you would have done differently, or like,
No, I really like the work, especially here. I still live at the same place that I did when I worked here, and I could back out of my driveway and be here in 15 minutes. And that was really nice compared to my last 30 plus years on the railroad, because the closest I could get was just over 80 miles, depending on which route I took to go. So, I mean, an 8-hour shift, I had 10 hours in it, minimum every day. I used to work a relief turn over at Grafton on the Ready Track Service Center. And there's a 8-hour short, so they swing forward. You'd get off at 7 o'clock and have to be back at 3 o'clock. It took me an hour to get home and an hour to get back, so that left 6 hours. You don't get much sleep in 6 hours.
no. Can't do much of anything in 6 hours.
Yeah, you just come home and grab a bite to eat, and basically turn around and go back. But then they changed the federal laws where you had to have at least 8 hours rest between shifts. I think they changed it to 10 hours. 10 hours between shifts, so they had to change all those shifts around. Not all of them, there was only one, and I had it.
When was that? When did they change the federal law? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, when I first started out, they didn't even have an hours of service. And then they got it for transportation people. If you had anything to do with the movement of a locomotive or a train, you fell under the hours of service. You could only work 16 hours and had to have, I don't know exactly what it was, you had to have so much time off. And then they changed it again and changed it again. And then they did away, we had hostlers to move our locomotives in the shop. They did away with that. They qualified all of us as hostlers. Gave us a little card, said we, by the grace of CSX Transportation, you're qualified to move a locomotive. So when they did that, it put us under the hours of service because we moved the locomotives. So they kind of screwed themselves when they did that. They could have left one guy there to move those locomotives on the shift under the hours of service, and then they could have used everybody else as they wanted. But when they made everybody else hostlers, that put them under the hours of service. And as the time went on, the hours of service got more strict, you know, trying to protect people from themselves. I mean, you get a guy out there and work him until he's so damn tired he can't keep his eyes open, he's not real safe, especially if he's pulling the throttle.
Can you explain a little bit what a hostler does, how they move the locomotives?
A hostler is he's an engineer in the shop working within we have what you call blue flag protection. We'd have to physically go down there to the other end of our domain where our tracks ended, put a derail up so nobody could come in, and put a blue flag up and a blue light if it was dark. That would tell whoever's coming in. Everybody knew about these laws. We had special locks on there that nobody could open except the mechanical people. And other crafts had their own safety stuff and locks and all that, lock out, tag out. If you was working on something that was hot, you'd have to lock it out and tag it out so nobody could come and engage it and kill you, basically. But the hostler was an engineer normally, and we had a position for a hostler in there to move we weren't supposed to move them because we weren't deemed qualified. Although you could put it on a test track if you were working on something and you fixed it and you needed to try it out, then you could legally put it on the test track and run it up and down through there. No difference in hostling, but it's just the difference in the rules. It was kind of a job protection for transportation engineers. But they eventually lost all that. made us locomotive movers is what they called us then. They wouldn't give us the glorified hostler's name.
Oh.
Terrible. But there was a lot of fun doing that work.
Yeah? What did you like best about it?
Quitting time.
That's fair. But you said you had fun doing this job. What was fun about it?
Well, I just enjoyed the work. I mean, there's a lot of, I always said, you know, working on a railroad, you make decent money. You're going to get a decent retirement if you stick in there and last it out. And the more you make, the less you have to do. Seems like. Take a supervisor's position. You don't have to do nothing. They pay you more. You could have been a railroader.
I could have been a railroader?
Where anybody can now.
What can I do on the railroad?
Anything.
Anything. Wow.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of different job classifications.
I thought I had to be strong to work on the railroad.
They got hundreds of people that
Yes,
do
it's
that.
pretty computerized now, is what I understand.
Chesney system was the first major railroad in I think in the world to totally computerize. I mean, there was people from out of the United States come in to actually study and see how they did theirs. They've got a building down there. It's a big old round building, kind of reminds of a roundhouse, except it's not. It's in Jacksonville. It's I forget what they call it, but I mean, I was in there. You go in there and there's just maps all around it of different sections of the railroad. They're all lit up, and the guy's sitting here and he's a dispatcher. He dispatches those trains. When they go through a block or a switch or whatever, it lights up on his board and tells him where they're at, what switches they went through and all that. It's just and it's dark in there, so you can see everything that's lit up on the map in front of you. Pretty neat.
Wow.
I don't know how many people's in there. There's like, I don't know, there's probably 15 or 20 people in there at one time. And those people, some of them transferred in for those jobs, but a lot of them didn't have any railroad experience at all. They just hired out and trained for that position. But if something goes wrong, they can't see where that train's at or what switch it just went through or stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure they try to cover that up, but it happens.
So I have a question.
Well, that's unusual.
So you keep talking about this place in Jacksonville that you had to go and get management training, and where this location with all the maps are. What's special about Jacksonville, Florida for Elkins?
For Elkins, nothing anymore because there's no railroad here. But Jacksonville is the home headquarters of CSX Transportation. They run everything out of Jacksonville. The presidents and vice presidents and the mechanical vice presidents and all, everybody's down there. Major, upper level management. They had like 4 or 5 buildings down there full of management. But I mean, I talked to a few other people that work for different railroads, and it seemed like we were probably better off than a lot of them were, as far as our management and the way they treated the people, because overall they treated their employees pretty good. I heard that like Norfolk Southern, or it used to be N&W, Norfolk and Western or something like that, and then it went Norfolk Southern. That was like they were like our #1 competitor in the eastern half of the United States. In fact, CSX had bought Conrail, and Norfolk Southern filed a lawsuit against them for monopolization or something, and then went to federal court, and they had to negotiate between the two of them and split. And they wound up, both of them, paying more for their percentages of Conrail than CSX had bought the entire outfit for. The time was over. But they stopped CSX from getting that much more railroad. Because if they'd have got all of Conrail, it would have just more or less dwarfed Norfolk Southern. There's a lot of backstabbing and shit goes on in those big games that they play.
Wow. I didn't realize that Norfolk was our big competitor
Yeah, yeah.
on the Eastern Seaboard. Huh.
CSX and Norfolk Southern are the two biggest railroads in the eastern half of the United States. Or used to be, I don't know what it is anymore. You lose all of that when you retire and only call them 6 years.
You don't keep up with the new developments?
Well, you know, if it would have lasted here and the railroad was still here, I would probably still have communication with people. But it's a 2-hour drive for me to go over to the shop and see the guys, and it's down so much. The last that I talked to anybody, which was over a year ago, they're down to 3 people on the service center working 24/7.
They're working 24/7?
They're filling 24/7 positions
Okay.
with 3 people. So those guys are working their butt off.
Oof.
But I went through a period like that too for several years where it would get down like that. But there was a lot of times it'd get down like that and I was on the lower end of the pole and I'd get cut off. Furloughed, have to go somewhere else and find a place. But the last few years, I was on top, so I didn't have to go anywhere. But then you're working by yourself and don't get any time off.
When you got furloughed, what would you do? What would happen?
Well, it's just like you're laid off. That's it. You're done until they call you back. You can, in the beginning, if you got furloughed, which happened, it happened a lot. Like when the miners would go on vacation, they would shut off. There was about 100 car people over here doing repairs on the cars. When the miners went on vacation, they would cut those people off. And they would classify that as an emergency furlough because the mines aren't using the coal hoppers. So they shut the people off that is maintaining them. Well, that's not an emergency. The miners take vacation every day in the year, just like we did. But the mines would shut down when they did it, so they would do that and it just pissed everybody off. But then, as the mines would come back up, sometimes they just call everybody back, sometimes they just call a percentage of them back, and then 2 or 3 weeks call another percentage. You never knew.
What was the longest that you ever got furloughed?
5 years.
5 years?
I got lucky. After they merged and made chassis system, there was a clause in, I was a machinist, there was a clause in that contract, I got a guaranteed 5-year in the contract. They had to pay me unemployment for 5 years if it lasted that long. And when that came about, nobody ever figured out, hell, you'll never get laid off for that long. Well, I did. And I drew that out. That's when I went to Willard, Ohio. That's when I called the Railroad Retirement Board and asked for a position if they had any. But I mean, I was drawing like 85% or somewhere in that neighborhood of my salary. So I'm not going to go 200 or 300 miles away from home and have to live and pay expenses for 15%. Be stupid. What I did, I was required to fill any vacancy that I was qualified for within a 50-mile radius of where I was furloughed from. I was furloughed from Grafton, so when somebody would go on vacation or something, they'd call me up and I'd have to go. Otherwise, they would dock, for every day that I didn't work it, they would dock me a day of my guarantee. I never missed any time. I mean, I earned a vacation every year, but just filling vacancies. And then I remember the last time the foreman over there called me, and he said, the M&K helper's coming in, I need you to come over and work it. They'll be here about 1 o'clock in the morning. I said, you'll need to call somebody that gives a shit because I don't work for this railroad no more. What do you mean? I said, my guarantee ran out. I can't live on scraps. I got to go somewhere. And I didn't go. But I went to Willard, Ohio about 2 days after that. He wasn't happy. Because he called me out to do that, and I had to do it whatever time it was on straight time. And if he called somebody else out at 1 o'clock in the morning, they got time and a half for it. So he didn't like that. But I didn't like being furloughed either.
So
Willard was really busy.
yeah.
That's the one that was halfway between Cumberland and Chicago, mainline being there. And it's busy. I worked over 100 days up there one time without a day off.
Oh really?
Never got to come home for over 3 months.
That sounds really hard.
It sucked. And a lot of those were double time days. I mean, double shift. We worked. We didn't have enough people to do them, especially if somebody's on vacation. Had to fill them then. And I worked over 100 days at Grafton one time without a day off, but I got to come home every day because I lived 50 miles away. And that was because of the FRA. The FRA come in there and caught 2 people under blue flag violation, which is a safety violation, which is automatic dismissal. You may get back, but they fire you on the spot. It was a blue flag violation, which is a life's critical rule type thing. Any rule that could kill you, they classified it as a life's critical rule, and if they caught you violating it, they escorted you off the property.
Wow.
And they did that. We were down to like 6 people, and they fired 2 of them on the spot, and one guy had taken his daughter, somebody roller skating and broke his ankle. So he was already off. We were down to 5. That was 2 more off. That left 3. 24/7 with 3 people. You don't get no days off.
Wow.
But look at the money you make.
Did that make you feel better about working 100 days without a day off?
No, nothing makes you feel better about working 100 days without a day off. Worked up till about the 4th of July, and the other guy, I told him, I said, you know, we can have a week off here and there, or take your rest days once in a while. The other 2 guys work 2 12-hour shifts. That's 24 hours. Well, it come up to a guy took his vacation, and then another guy took his vacation. I hadn't had no vacation, so 4th of July, I said, well, but my vacation time, oh, they just whined and cried. I took my vacation, but they called the guy back with the broken leg early.
I have a question that is a bit of a subject change, but in some of the other interviews I've done, they've mentioned a flood that happened in '85. Do you remember that? Were you here for that?
I was actually laid off when that happened, but yeah, I remember that. It flooded out Rollsburg. It took the tracks out of Parsons. I filled vacancies through all that. At Grafton, I wasn't over here in Elkins. So I don't know what all they went through. I don't think it really had a whole lot of effect on this place other than outlying tracks, different areas. But yeah, it just shut the railroad down. It washed out some tracks. You ever been through Parsons?
I think I drove through it with my housemate, but we didn't stay very long.
Right through downtown Parsons, right straight across from the courthouse, there's a railroad bridge there. The water was in the 2nd story of the courthouse right there
Oh, wow.
in Parsons.
That's
It takes a lot to bend a railroad track. And there was railroad tracks bent around trees.
Wow.
That's a lot of force, a lot of water force. Yeah, that was pretty nasty flood. You get a lot of slides, washouts and stuff like that, especially in the spring of the year when you get a lot of rain. Because these mountain streams, a lot of them, you know, the water don't even come down these streams until the wet part of the year, and then the ground gets saturated and water runs down, and then a tree falls over and backs the water up, and then the tree washes out, and here she comes. Stuff like that. A lot of times it'll wash mud and rocks down on the railroad tracks. Train comes around the curve there, and they don't see it until they're within a couple hundred yards sometimes. They're not going to get stopped.
Oh.
They don't stop. Big old rock will just knock that locomotive right off the track.
That sounds scary.
I've had several of those instances over the years and people just walked away. I always said this is the luckiest goddamn place in the world. But I mean, there is cases where people die, but there's so many times that people just walk away from it unscathed in any way, just lucky.
Yeah.
Because it could have went so much worse.
What other things do you think people ought to know about your time in the railroad? Because we've gone through all my questions.
Oh, nothing. They don't need to know what I did on there. It's funny though, railroad buffs. I remember we were working over here and they had, I think it was in Baltimore, Western Maryland Railroad Association or something. And me and electricians working out here one time. And it was, I don't know, 4 or 5 people pulled up over there and they was wanting to take pictures and all this. Some of them just come in and run around. But a lot of them would come over and ask you because you don't want people running around when you're moving stuff like that. Hell, you can't watch them. But anyway, we were working on one of the last engines that had the Western Maryland paint scheme and all that stuff on it. Those people were going crazy wanting pictures of that. I only actually worked here for about 5 or 6 years. A couple of years, I think 2.5 years as a carman and 2.5 or 3 as a machinist. Most of my time was on the road. Most of it actually was at Grafton, but I worked a few other places here and there just filling in time. We had a guy, there was a lot of people come in over there at Grafton to take pictures, railroad buffs. And there was a guy came in, this guy was a surgeon in WVU, doctor. And I don't remember his name, but he come in there for a long time. He come in every month or 2 to take pictures. And he brought his dad with him one time. His dad was like in his late 70s, early 80s, and his hearing was failing. And I just walked out of the office, and his dad was standing in the middle of the track taking a picture of the sand tipple with his back to the movement. Scared the living shit out of me. I'm screaming at him, and he can't hear me.
Oh no.
I didn't know he couldn't hear. Didn't even know who he was. But his son, seeing me going crazy, going after his dad, and he was close to him, so he got him off of it. And you know, it didn't get that close. It would have if we hadn't have noticed him there. But it scared the hell out of me. And then prom time, you wouldn't believe the people that come down there, mostly girls in their prom dresses, and pose on the railroad tracks for pictures.
Yeah, they do that.
But they don't know where they're at. They come right out in the middle of the yard there in a live track with stuff moving. If they go over on a siding or something where nothing's moving, it'd be a little bit safer. But still, it's trespassing. They ain't supposed to do it. I've seen that a lot.
Any other, do you consider yourself a railroad buff?
No, absolutely not. I rode a train one time before I ever went to work for the railroad, before I ever even had any ideals of never even thought about working for the railroad. I was overseas, went on leave, and when I came back, the ship had moved. So I went back to where I originally left from, which was Catania. I know what Catania. Somewhere down in the southern part of Italy. And the ship had an economizer blowed up on one of the boilers, and they went into a yard facility up there to get that economizer rebuilt. And it was like 12-hour train ride up to where the ship was on a train. That thing stopped at every cow path. Major mode of transportation over there, you know. And it was just a little old train with 6 or 8 cars on it. And it stopped every 5 minutes for something. That's why it took so long to get there, I guess. Oh, and other than that, I took a train ride from St. Louis to Chicago when I left for boot camp. Took a bus to St. Louis and it put me on a train at AFE's building and gave me a stack of orders for 80 people and said, "You're in charge, take them to St. Louis, or take them to Chicago." Here I grew up in a little old town with 350 people was the population. I've never been anywhere in my life, and they gave me this and say, "Get these 80 people to Chicago." We made it.
You made it. Oh gosh, what was that like?
That was scary.
Wow.
I hadn't been out of high school about 3 weeks. We got to Chicago about 2 o'clock in the morning and had to walk from the train station to the naval base, Great Lakes Naval Recruit. Well, it wasn't a recruit center, it was a boot camp's what it was. It was a long walk, middle of the night. Nobody mugged us though. There was 80 of us.
It would have been quite the task.
They gave us all a bunk. It was about, I don't know, probably 4 o'clock in the morning and reveille at 6 o'clock. What the hell did I get into here? I went to work for Kingsford Charcoal Plant right after I got out of the service. I hadn't been out but 2 or 3 weeks. I thought, man, I gotta have something to do. And that was a dumb move. I could have drawn unemployment for a year. I went over there and went to work. And then when the railroad called me, I had put in for a game warden. I had a friend that was a game warden. I had put in for West Virginia game warden, and I got the paperwork to go to so we're on the other side of Charleston to do the training for the game warden. But I decided to take the railroad job because it paid better, and I figured I'd have a better retirement out of it. Because once I retired, my wife got like almost 50% of my retirement. That's how you should interview some of these wives that put up with it. But a lot of them, the divorce rate for railroaders was really high.
Oh yeah?
Especially in transportation, because they were on the road so much. I worked with one guy who worked at Grafton, had been married 6 times.
6 times?
Twice to the same woman. Yeah. I said, "Damn, Earl, you're going to tear up the railroad retirement if all them women get paid."
Would it go to all of his ex-wives too?
Would it what?
Would part of his retirement go to all of them too? Is that what you said?
Every one of those wives, if he was married to them for 5 years, they were vested in his retirement.
Oh.
So it pays like 48% to your spouse. It doesn't say how many spouses that qualify. So he had 5 different women that he was married to. Of course, several of them he didn't last that long, but there was a couple of them that he did. So when those two draw their 48%, if they don't remarry, they're still qualified for it. That's 100% basically, on top of what he draws from it. But if the spouse remarries, then they're no longer qualified for the railroad retirement benefits, which I think all of his did. But he lived hard for it.
Wow. Well, your wife mentioned on the phone that it was a hard lifestyle to keep up a marriage and to raise a family.
Oh yeah.
You know?
I worked in a shop and I was gone a lot. And once I got into the locomotives, it was nothing to get a phone call in the middle of the night. Hey, I need you to come out and go over and look at this locomotive out in who knows where the hell. I left here one time, went over to Baird. I got up at 3 o'clock. They called me just before I left. Hey, I need you to go to Baird. Went over there. I don't even remember what the hell was wrong with the thing. It was on his GP9 over there that broke down. Went over there and worked on it, finally figured out what it was. Well, I had to come back to Elkins to get parts. That was, I don't know, probably a couple hours over there. And come back, got the part, went back over, got it fixed. Time I got back to Elkins, it was time for me to start my regular shift. Did the same thing up in Laurel Bank one time, you know where that's at?
And I don't know where Laurel Bank is.
They had a beanery up there, you know what a beanery is? That's what they used to call the place that they housed the crews. They had, I don't know, 4 or 5 coal mines over there, and they would house the crews over there. They'd service those mines, you know, and they'd put them up in the beanery for a number of hours until they needed them again, and then they'd use them again and then send them home. But they fed them over there. They had like their own little, wasn't really a restaurant because you couldn't walk in there and buy food, but that's where they fed the crews there, and they called it a beanery. And I had to go over there and work on engines several times. And I did one of those all-nighters over there. I went over there and they said, "Oh, we got a water jumper leak on this locomotive. You got any?" "Oh yeah." But they sent an electrician with me. Why do I need an electrician with a water leak? Anyhow, we went over there. It wasn't a water jumper, it was a water pump. A water jumper connects 2 lines together, you know. Well, the water pump is big. So I had to come back and get a water pump. It's over on the other side of Snowshoe, you know where that's at? That's where Laurel Bank's at. But that was another one of those, when I got back, it was time to go to work. But you know, that's back when you're young and dumb. You can handle it. I ain't doing that shit now. I might do it once, but it'd take me a week to recuperate. But that was one thing about working on locomotives, you never knew what you was going to get into. Had one come in from Laurel Bank, no, it was Cowan one time I was working over Grafton. Somebody said, "Hey, there's a dead squirrel on the walkway." Oh, down there and looked, and it was a flying squirrel that had, I guess, glided into the side of the locomotive and was laying on the walkway on the opposite side from the door. Well, it was still alive. So we had a hostler back then. I said, "You see that flying squirrel laying over there?" He said, "No." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is it alive?" I said, "Yes, alive." So he walks around there and picks it up. Mistake. He couldn't put it down.
You couldn't put it down?
Hell no, it ate him up. I bit him 6 times, real quick, run up his arm.
Oh no! Yeah, you don't pick up a wild animal.
Especially a flying squirrel that come in from Cowan on a locomotive, he'd probably scared to death. I don't know how he made it all the way there. Why would it just lay there? But it was there.